Hello, everyone. Today I'm joined by Mr. Brian Frimpong, the managing partner at Zebu Investment Partners. How are you doing today, Brian?
I'm good, thanks. How are you, Tony?
I'm fine. Thanks for asking. So tell us, what is Zebu Investment Partners?
So Zebu Investments is a private equity fund manager that is focused on creating funds and investing across sub-Saharan Africa using a private equity model.
Okay. And could you explain more about your investment strategy?
Yeah, so so far it was started as a specialized fund manager that focused on deploying capital to agribusinesses. And sometime in 2008, there was a global food crisis. We experienced shortages of grains and then spiraling prices. At that time, there were quite a number of PE funds, just sort of short of about 20 that invested in Africa with a general strategy. And so we thought that considering the land availability on the continent and the kind of farm sizes, as well as the value chain potential that we had on the continent, it made sense to create a PE, SME focused type of fund that would deploy capital to existing agribusinesses to support food security on the continent. And so ours essentially is meant to sort of create value by in food availability on the continent and also make a return for investors, mostly development institutions that support these initiatives.
Okay. And could you explain a little bit further about why agri-tech is your target area of interest?
Okay, so we invest across the food value chain. Agri-tech is sort of on the tertiary side, but then agribusiness is our main focus.
Okay.
And the idea is that Africa has the largest sort of land sizes left. Agriculture employs the largest sort of people on the continent because you have a lot of smallholder farmers. And then also agriculture employs quite a number of women. And so we wanted to bring in this inclusion. And we decided that the fund was not just going to invest in farms, but then we're going to look at processing, distribution, and along the value chain, we're going to also include sort of ag finance as well as technology to help with mechanization on the primary side, climate-related sort of production to enhance efficiency in converting these food into sort of semi-processed or secondary processed food, just so we can preserve them for a long time and then make them accessible through distribution to companies that sort of and consumers that sort of need them. And so it covers, the whole spectrum of agribusiness, and we use technology as well as finance and all the good things to create value for both companies and the people in the agribusiness ecosystem.
And speaking of technology, in what ways are you noticing technology improving food security in Africa?
Tech plays a very critical role in making sure that there's significant efficiency. And tech isn't just sort of looking at mechanical technology, but sometimes even in the science of food. Like there are cases where you have seedlings that are sort of climate engineered to provide the kind of yields that you expect, right? There are farms we've invested in farms in Cameroon, for example, where when we started, the yields were sort of 1 metric ton per hectare for maize. And through sort of testing and re-engineering the process, we were able to achieve 5 to 6 metric ton per hectare based on the climate and in the soil, elements of the farm. So those are sort of what's it called improvements in practices using tech from the seedling side, looking at the type of pest controls that we could use, looking at even the fertilizer, the soil composition, and then we onboard tractors and then storage facilities, etc., to make sure that these harvested grains, right, are preserved for a long time just so we could distribute them to either people who are buying them for poultry farming, to the breweries. And then also we had a piggery that allows us to also feed the piggery with those. So that's just a simple example of how technology can be transformative. And then you have your other sort of GPS related tech, where we invested in a company in South Africa that allows us to trace products from farm to sort of the table. So this traceability elements to allows you to detect when harvests are done, just so you can also be able to provide access to market to the farmers, and then also access to high quality products for the consumers.
Interesting. So you mentioned Cameroon, you mentioned South Africa. What other regions are you focused on, and why?
So Zebu is a Pan-African investor, and so far we've done 11 countries. We have offices in Ghana, South Africa, and Mauritius. And typically we try to invest around the countries in which we have offices, or even in East Africa where we don't have an office. We try to invest in companies that we think have a good progression, and that allows us to use our networks in those countries to also support. And so we've seen transactions in Cameroon, we've done Mozambique, Kenya, we've done Burkina Faso, Nigeria, South Africa. So if you look at the top economies in Africa, somehow we've invested in them, and we continue to sort of explore these frontier markets, because these are the markets that sometimes we think that would see the value in which we bring with the capital and then the technical assistance that comes with the fund.
Sure. And speaking of the capital, how much do you invest in terms of like check sizes, minimum, maximum, and I guess the size of the funds that you have under your umbrella?
The current AUM of our funds under management is about 136 million. And we invest anywhere from 2 million to 8 million, and also allow ourselves to sort of do follow-ons that can lead to about 40 million per transaction. But the good thing is that we have investors that are mainly pension funds, developed finance institutions based in Africa and Europe, fund of funds that are based in US, etc., that are allowed to co-invest alongside with us in transactions that are either big or in transactions that are core to their mandate. So these co-investment rights allow them to come into big transactions. And then within the ecosystem of investors, sometimes we also co-invest alongside big investors that have done Africa before. So we have this, we invested in the largest grocery store in Mozambique called Terama, and we invested alongside Norfund. That's the DFI for Norway, and that has proven to be a very good high impact transaction, which even during the COVID period was still preserved employment, as well as provided good access to needed food and supplies for the community in Maputo.
Part of my mission, or one of my interests, is seeing more Black funds in the US, or Black fund managers collaborating with fund managers on the continent. What would you say, or what are your thoughts on the viability of those type of collaborations happening, and what is your advice for US-based funds run by Black fund managers, and the easiest way to navigate collaborating with a fund such as yours to invest in African businesses?
Yeah, we've seen a growing number of interest from both fund managers based out of US, as well as Black-owned fund managers, and activities such as Year of Return in 2019 in Ghana, and other activities across Africa, such as the Global Citizens events in South Africa, etc., sort of highlighted the importance of these collaborations. Just about 2 weeks ago, Serena Williams invested in a company in Nigeria. So that's just an example of, you know, growing interest.
Yeah.
And then one of our LPs is actually Kuramo Capital, that has leadership in Black owned. The leader is the CEO is a Nigerian American, and he worked in the New York pension system for a long time as the chief investment officer. So that awareness is growing, and it's a good thing because then you have some sort of cultural collaboration. You have some sort of a connection to the investment, and then ultimately there's a desire for that impact, where if you understand how the company creates value as well as make impact for its community, then that closeness and willingness to invest is a little bit stronger. And the good thing is Africa has a higher perceived risk than the actual risk. And Africa fund managers stand to be able to sort of properly articulate the rare gems, opportunities that are on the continent that they can collaborate with typical European or American investors to be able to draw more capital on the continent. So I've seen that growth in both, you know, VC and the PE industry, where you have American or Black American investors looking to do transactions here and there across the continent with African GPs.
That's great. And in terms of the opportunities, what are you seeing are some, I guess, current and emerging opportunities in the agribusiness space?
Okay. With us, we see a growing, initially mentioned AgTech, a growing inclusion in technology, climate-related type technology that enhances, you know, quality of food, that preserves food without committing the nutritional value for a long time. You see technology opportunities in decarbonizing the processing methods. So I'll give an example that renewable energy has become a way to sort of provide access to power and then access to efficient and non-carbonizing power. So instead of oil and gas in communities, powered electricity, you have communities that can have access to solar mini grids and then supply that to farms for their mechanized needs, for cold storage chains, etc. And this is making the quality of food this food lasts longer. And when these smallholder farmers know that there's access to be able to sell their produce without losing them to either the lifetime perishment, you know, of, let's say, their harvest, then they're able to grow more of these foods, either for domestic consumption or export, which increases their incomes. And then with the incomes, they can also sort of pay for school fees, pay for better healthcare, etc. So there are all these emerging technologies that is coming through. We invested in an interesting company in Kenya, for example. It's an e-commerce platform that provides products to people within the rural communities. So what the company does is that it allows agents, it has agents dotted around Kenya, and we're looking to replicate this for other African countries, East and West. It allows the farmers, people within the rural communities, to place order for goods or even food items such as rice, sugar, etc. So finished products on phones, and within the space of, you know, a day to 3 days, the product is delivered to them. They can use the same platform to also order agricultural inputs such as fertilizer, pest control, tools, etc. And we're looking at ways in which that platform can allow the farmers to also sell their produce to people within the urban communities or for aggregators that export. So when you have this, you know, technology providing a good interface for farmers to access products that initially they never had, you know, they never thought they could have access to, or it was just too laborious for them to travel miles to the city to acquire and then take back home, then it makes their whole livelihood easier. It makes them it gives them the opportunity to explore different things beyond their own possibilities, and then make them also efficient in delivering goods to their farms, etc. So it goes both ways, where you have the phone that has transformed the lives of farmers by just giving them access to finished products, and also being able to give them access to medicine and other ways to sell their produce to people in the urban communities. There's just one example of how technology transforming the continent. And we continue to look for deals or opportunities like these, simple technology tools, simple technology platforms that enhances payments, that enhances access to finance, and then also brings inclusion and employment for the youth on the continent, as well, especially women entrepreneurs, and then SME businesses that are dotted across the continent.
No, that's a great example. And what are your thoughts on an increased processing capabilities so that these farmers and other manufacturers can export a greater amount of their products internationally? And what would it take for an increase in that to happen?
Yeah, so it is already happening. And for farmers to have access to, or for industries to have access to be able to process additional harvest or produce from farmers, there has to be access to good water and power, as well as the people, the human resources, and good machinery. So you have situations where the universities on the continent are designing simple machinery. You don't need like big factories to be able to access communities. Now, for palm oil, for example, there are all these mini mills that allow people within a catchment community of 20 miles to submit their produce for the mills to be able to churn them into oil and then pay the farmers. In the past, you had to spend close to between $5 to $10 million to be able to get a proper mill set up. But now you're talking about $500,000, $1 million, etc. So when you have these sizes of processes in place or installed in communities, it simply empowers them to be able to do more. And then with the installation, I did mention solar systems. Yeah. So the solar system, the renewable energy sources like solar and wind allows you to install a source of power for even communities that don't have access to electricity from the grid. And you can also put battery technology on these factories. So allows you to do shifts even at night if you need to do so. So it transforms the way we perceived factories, because first of all, you're talking about mini systems, right? Mini modules that allow you to be able to quickly take from the farmers during harvest, preserve them, or transform them into products. And then you have the next stage where either aggregators come for these semi-processed products, or cold storage warehouses are available, because the cold storage warehouses too can be powered by solar. And so then it kind of builds up the value chain to reduce the level of waste that we used to experience in the past. And then when the farmer realizes that, okay, all their harvest can be acquired within a certain space of time, then there's encouragement to be able to increase the farm sizes and become bigger commercial players within their ecosystems.
Interesting. And because of all the increased attention on African startups, are you seeing also an increase in the support, whether it's in the public or private sector, for the founders themselves?
Yeah. So there's quite a lot of support from African governments, international organizations, and even funds like ours. Like we have, in addition to our funding, we have what we call a technical assistance facility, because we realized that we need to be able to have experts train our the companies that we invest in if they have an agro-risk program.
Mm.
And so what happens is, assuming we invest in a factory that needs to integrate backwards, right? We spend resources on the backward integration, the large commercial farm, and then within these rural communities, you always easily discover that there are about 300 or 400 smallholder farmers that you can train. You can use the nucleus platform to train them and then acquire their produce at harvest. So when you take you train them, and then you also give them access to market. When that happens, your nucleus commercial farm can always sort of supply, let's say, 50 to 70% of your factory needs, and then the agro-risk program supplies the remaining needs of the factory. This turns out some symbiotic relationships where after your tractor works, you can always go and plow the farms of these agro farmers, and then you can take them through, soil improvement processes, fertilizer utilization, pest inputs utilization to optimize the yields of their farms. And so when at harvest time, they can always supply their produce to you. I've seen this work in, grains. I've seen this work in pineapples. I've seen this work in potato factories, etc. So this is something, it's a phenomenon that then sort of build economic blocks within these rural communities and allow them to be much more sort of productive from that standpoint. And then the factories can then decide to sell their produce for domestic consumption, food security, or for export. In examples, like I've seen palm companies that do that. So they produce for both export. I've seen potato companies that do that. They process the potato into puree, and then they export some of the produce. Yeah.
In terms of land ownership, are you seeing any challenges where it comes to identifying ownership? And I guess, how are you managing or maneuvering those obstacles if you're even coming across them?
Yeah, we've seen elements of challenges. I think governments across the continent are sort of helping to resolve these ownership challenges by either titles, etc. I think historically, families have owned lands, and then when they grow up and they have kids, right, they divide the land among the kids. Some kids want to work, some kids don't want to use the land. So, but then there wasn't that robust registration process. But now in some communities, you have governments that intervene to make this work. There are other communities where there's a chieftaincy system that allows land allocation. It remains a big challenge in some countries, but in other countries, it's very easy to be able to have access to 5,000 hectares, etc. if you want to do huge commercial farming. I've seen the process sort of improve significantly over the past decade, just because of the value in which agriculture brings. Yeah. If you go to countries like Cote d'Ivoire, ag is perceived as estates, and then Ghana is transforming slightly gradually, although it might be slower than we want it to, from the smallholder type community to encourage large commercial farms. And I think those things would sort of work out when the capital flows and the return stories are shared across countries or across continent.
Interesting. Okay. And for any startups that are interested in, pitching to you or your team, what would you suggest that they have in place before approaching?
Yeah, I may be the wrong person to sort of discuss startups. The fund strategy looks at companies that have about 3 years of track record already. So it could be food processing, it could be FMCG, it could be even an existing farm that has been in place. But we want to see sort of a history of revenue. We don't necessarily need to see EBITDA positive companies, so far as there's a path to sort of cash flow positive. And there's a strategy that allows us to also bring on board our capabilities to support, sort of grow up the businesses. A lot of the VCs that I've seen on the continent are mostly tech-related VCs.
Mm.
That you can easily tell why it's possible to have a sort of a pre-seed, a seed round, Series A, etc., because you can quickly sort of scale up. Whereas in ag and in some of the sort of capex heavy sectors, you see a lot of support from government, or you see a lot of support from international institutions, like mostly countries that have bilateral relationship with those governments, to say, okay, let's push, let's say, rice production as a strategy. And so if the German government has an arrangement with Ghana government, then they create this fund to say, okay, any guy who wants to start rice can get technical assistance or can get XYZ support, so far as government can put in some capital, or through some of these institutions get access to grants, etc. And so it's a little different depending on industry. Financial services is straightforward. You need to meet minimum capital requirements. I think fintech too, the biggest challenge for a lot of these fintech startups is the licensing within the countries, etc. So each industry sort of has its own challenges or has its own requirements, but then when they come together, it all depends on the investment promotion or the type of support that the countries want to drive to be able to help an industry.
Interesting. And which countries would you say, are at the forefront of making that process simple and seamless?
Process for startups or process for
startups, and also, well, let's just say for startups, yeah.
Yeah, so it all depends on which industry. I've seen Kenya do very well for technology, and so there's a lot of tech companies there.
For sure.
Nigeria, I think Nigeria just passed a startup bill or something of that sort.
Yeah.
And before that, there was huge transformation, but now with the startup bill, you can see the momentum building up. Egypt, etc. Egypt, Morocco have a good startup ecosystem. Ghana is driving this initiative through a lot of accelerator hubs, a lot of venture capital sort of fund manager support, and finding ways to be able to harmonize the law just so startup companies can thrive. South Africa has always been sort of a forefront on the continent, and so there's been startups in multiple sectors. They have even exchanges for smaller companies that want to allow investors to exit. And so governments have realized that SMEs, or to become an SME, you need to start something, and these things are huge sources of employment. So different governments have different ways of sort of supporting, but if you look at the top 10, 15 economies on the continent, you can see a lot of kind of progression around making sure that the startup ecosystem is strong enough just so they can build, companies that can transcend beyond the borders, taking from examples that they've seen, in Silicon Valley and in some of these European countries like Estonia, etc.
Okay, thank you. Well, Brian, thank you so much for sharing your insights. I definitely appreciate you stopping by. I'm going to tell a quick story that you probably weren't expecting, but everyone who's listening, Brian and I went to Howard University together, and there's a section of the yearbook where they asked people what they want to be in the future. And Brian, from day one, said he wanted to run a private equity firm or fund. And here he is now, like 20 something years later, doing that exact same thing.
Yeah.
Well done, Brian. Keep up the great work.
Yeah, speak positive things to your future, everyone, and it shall come to pass.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Definitely proof of that. So we're going to stay in touch and, connect on all things Africa business and investment. So looking forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you very much, Tony. And thank you, everyone, for listening to this.
Yes, indeed. Take care and you have a great day.
All right. You too. Take care.